If I remember correctly, said Nico, the first time I met Will was during a battle. Which one? Will narrowed his eyes. He still looked so weak and tired. Oh, wait, was it when Octavian's faction attacked the camp? Uh, no, said Nico. Wasn't that only like a little over a year ago? We've known each other a lot longer than that. Oh, Will rubbed his face. Sorry, you're right. Nico felt another twinge of concern. Is your memory getting worse? Will grunted, but did not answer the question. You were around before that, he said hazily. Long before. Back around the time when the Battle of Manhattan. Nico smiled. Yeah, I was. I wasn't staying at Camp Half-Blood much, though. I remember that. And even when you were at camp, it was so hard to pin you down. You wouldn't stay put. You were afraid of getting close to anyone. Nico was silent for a moment. Sometimes I still am, he said. Like earlier, when you were complaining that I wasn't telling you things. Sort of. Will pressed his hand against his stomach. I don't know if I was being fair to you. That's not important now, said Nico. Let's get through this. I hope you do not feel that I am something to get through, said Gorgira. I am not trying to make things difficult for you boys. For a moment, Nico had almost forgotten the nymph was there. He tried to tamp down his fear and frustration, his urge to scream, just let us go. It's a trade, right? He said. We give you our story, and you give us a boat. If you must see it that way, she said. Yes. I remember. Will coughed softly, and Nico ran his hand over his boyfriend's back. His eyes traveled down to the gauze on Will's leg. It was completely soaked through with blood. What do you remember? Gorgira asked. I remember how sad I was when you left to go find Percy, Will said to Nico, when he disappeared. You were sad? But did we even know each other then? Maybe not as close friends or anything, but I was drawn to you. Maybe it was because you were so mysterious. Maybe it was because you kept pushing away everyone whenever they tried to be your friend. Not a lot of people tried to be my friend in those days, said Nico. That's not true, said Will, and for a moment his energy seemed to come back. Plenty of us tried to be friendly to you, and you always had an excuse or a mean remark ready for us. That doesn't sound like me, Nico said, trying to play it deadpan, but Will gave him a stern look. Okay, fine. Maybe that sounds like me. We met way before the Battle of Manhattan, actually, said Will, leaning against Nico. You came into the big house, remember? What? Nico scratched his head. When was this? Back when I was still training to be a field medic, with Michael Yu. Will fell silent, unable to finish, and that's when the fragment of memory came back to Nico. The sword fight, he said. I'd only been at camp a couple of days. Chiron had me training with the other campers, and I went too hard. You sliced your own leg, said Will, smiling weakly. If I remember correctly, you missed the target dummy completely because you were arguing with Chiron. I love that you seem to remember all the most embarrassing moments of my life, said Nico. Way to go, Will. I only remember that because of what came after. The part that's more striking was you, in the big house. You wouldn't sit still, and Michael was barking commands at you because you were bleeding everywhere, and you calmed me down, said Nico. The image bloomed in his mind. A young Will Solis, his blonde hair bushy and slightly unkempt, holding Nico's leg still, Will's blue eyes boring into his own. At least, I tried, said Will. I don't think it worked. It did, said Nico. Even if it was only for a moment. I was a little difficult when I was younger. Will grinned. Oh, only when you were younger? Shut up. That's news to me. You've never been difficult since. Nico shifted uneasily. He glanced over at the old nymph, who was studying the two of them with a wistful look. So, is that it, Will? Is that really how we met? I think so. I'm pretty sure I saw you running around Camp Half-Blood when you were originally rescued by Percy and Annabeth, but that was our first face-to-face moment. Nico shook his head. I didn't even realize that was you back then, but, well, I also don't remember much about my first few weeks at the camp. I felt so out of place. Gorgira sighed. It seems you two have a complicated and labyrinthian connection. Would really love to never think about a labyrinth again, Nico muttered. She smiled. I find this fascinating. Some mortals are not aware of the threads that bind them. You could both be wrong about the first time you met, and yet the two of you have orbited each other for so long, like heavenly bodies in the sky. Will squeezed Nico's hand. I like how that sounds. Nico studied Will's broken fingernails, the cuts on his knuckles. He certainly felt like he was spinning through space, like he would go shooting off into the void if it weren't for Will's gravity. Well, Nico said at last, maybe we don't remember the first time we actually met, but I do remember when I considered you a friend. Tell me, Gorgira said. Nico heard the yearning in her voice, insatiable, just like the three-headed dog Cerberus begging for bones. Just one more. Just one more. Nico worried Gorgira would keep demanding stories, pulling on string after string until their whole lives unraveled at their feet. Nevertheless, he wanted to talk about it. He looked into Will's tired blue eyes when he spoke, not Gorgira's. It was at camp, after Octavian, when he, Will's face drooped. Nico knew he hated that memory. When Nico and Michael Kahale had allowed Octavian to launch himself to his own death. I remember. We defeated Gaia. You were standing in the doorway of your cabin. Will laughed softly. I remember that too. I think I scolded you pretty hard. You did, confirmed Nico, but it was the way you did it. You made it clear that you wanted me around. You said you wanted me to come to the infirmary and help because you could use a friendly face. It was true, and you did help. You brought me closer instead of rejecting me, Nico said, his voice cracking. I'd never been called a friendly face, ever. You made me rethink everything. My place in camp, my crush on Percy, my future. It took you scolding me like you were the camp director to make me realize that I was wanted. Gorgira sniffled and then wiped her eyes. You'll have to excuse me, she said. It's hard not to react to something like that. Will swayed and Nico studied him. You okay? Asked Nico. This place, he said. I'm so tired. I know, Nico said, watching apprehensively as the blood seeped across the gauze bindings on Will's leg. He turned to Gorgira. We need to go if we're going to reach Tartarus. Wait, said Will. I remember something else. I know we need to go, but you remember what Percy and Annabeth said about how important it is to remind each other of the world above? Nico frowned. But we're not even in Tartarus yet. It feels like we are, said Will. And I know you're worried, but just give me this. It does make me feel better. Nico gazed at Gorgira, and the whispers in his mind returned, voices telling him what he already knew about himself, all of his worst fears and failures. All right, he said to Will, if it helps. And that brought a bit of color back to Will's face. I remember when I knew that this was more than a friendship. That made Nico smile despite himself. I remember my moment too. Will's eyes filled with tears. I think mine is different than yours. But I know mine happened first, Nico said. Tell me, Gorgira said, moving closer to Nico and Will. Tell me one more story. And Nico felt another string start to unravel.